Yes, it is, Arthur.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Astrid and Wolde from Ecopreneur and also a member of the ECESP. I'm delighted to have you all here together with two keynote speakers. This workshop will discuss the need for economic incentives to achieve green recovery towards a low carbon circular economy. How can economic incentives such as taxation, CO2 pricing, circular procurement, and several others be used to create a strong market demand for circular products and services? What are the political challenges to realize them? And after an introduction by Professor Paul Ekins and also by Astrid Ladefoged, the participants, you, will be spread out over breakout groups led by members of this group, and that will then participate in a closing panel. So first of all, I would like to mention that the plenary part of this meeting is being recorded and also that the chat will be saved. So if you have any relevant things to mention to this group, please do so. Please feel free to also, for instance, put your questions to the speakers in the chat as input for the breakout groups. And also for the panel discussion afterward, or if you have some relevant report, for instance, that you would like to share with this group. At the same time, we would like to keep the meeting more interesting than the chat and to avoid having whole discussions in the chat. So that was like housekeeping. Also, please, if you have already not done that, please state your name and organization on your Zoom meeting identity. So if you don't or have already not done it, click on participants, look for your own name, click on more, and then rename if needed. Now, if there is any technical problem, please then mention this to Bas Roelofs or to Lucas Durech. They are both as participants here in the group. And also for the breakout groups, I just already mentioned that you will be randomly assigned. This is due to technical limitations. And so now go to the first speaker. Now, just before I do that, just mention that we have written in this group, which has been operating for months already, an orientation paper which is available on the web. And the central thesis is about economic incentives that are so crucial to steer the market demands towards circular choices and also towards true pricing, and also to have a return on investment for those massive investments planned. And with that being said, I would like to move to our first speaker, Paul Ekins. Paul Ekins, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Arthur. And good morning, everybody. It's a privilege to be here and talk on this important topic. I'm going to share my screen. I've got 10 minutes and only got a few slides, and I hope that what I say will set up the discussion groups adequately. Okay, I think I've got some. I'm just going to go out and do that again. I'm hoping you can now see the slide properly. Someone just
yes, we can.
Yes, we can, Paul.
Okay, thank you. Right. Well, the importance of economic incentives for the circular economy. Well, they're not just important; they are all important. And until we have incentives for the circular economy, it won't happen. Simply having moral suasion and saying this would be a good thing to do, that doesn't work in the kind of economy that we have in Europe, or indeed in anywhere else. And those 3 bullet points there are pretty obvious. The incentives for circularity are currently nothing like strong enough to shift towards a circular economy. without incentives for circularity, the circular economy will not happen. So what I routinely do is when someone says they want a circular economy, I ask them what incentives that do not currently exist they will introduce to achieve it. And there are only three sorts of incentive to increase circularity. You can either have demand creation, which would need, unless the markets are pushing circularity, which currently they are not, that would need government action, and we'll talk a bit about that. Or you need pricing, increasing the price of less circular products and reducing the price of more circular products and processes, and obviously we'll talk a lot about that. Or we need regulation that will mandate more circular products and processes, and clearly that regulation needs to be monitored and enforced, otherwise it won't act as an incentive to change behavior. I thought the leadership group recommendations in the paper that Artur mentioned were really good. So we've got there 7 kinds of incentives that could be introduced, and you can see some of them are demand creation, some of them are to do with regulation, as in the extended producer responsibility regulations, and some to do with pricing in that number 2. We've got obviously then 3 pricing possibilities: a tax shift from labor to resources, no or low VAT, and CO2 pricing. And then there's a regulation that might add mandatory recycled content for specific product groups. And then there may be additional demand side incentives beyond green public procurement, such as information provision, labeling, whatever that may be. And I think that's quite a useful breakdown, not least because it shows just how far we have to go. A piece of work that we're doing in the context of our kind of Lancet countdown to 2030 here will show that as far as CO2 pricing is concerned, and this is going to be published in early December, the average CO2 price across the world's carbon emissions is negative. In other words, on average, we are still subsidizing the use of fossil fuels. So if we wonder why we're not making faster progress globally towards CO2 reduction, well, we don't need to look much further than that, I would argue. Clearly, there are a lot of differences. There are some countries that have high CO2 prices, but that's an average across the world CO2 emissions as a whole. And of course, that's what the atmosphere sees, the world CO2 emissions as a whole. So I just want to raise a few of the obstacles to the implementation of these incentives and potential solutions. And I'm afraid there are a lot of obstacles. It's not really at all surprising that policymakers have found it really difficult to introduce these incentives at anything like the required strength. There are obviously competitiveness issues if countries or indeed regions like Europe seek to do these things themselves and they make certain products more expensive. Well, obviously, as we've seen with the EU emissions trading scheme, what comes out of that is rebates, free allowances, and increasingly a discussion about border tax adjustments. But I don't think anyone underestimates both the political and administrative complexity of border tax adjustments. Then you've got the administrative complexity of instrument design, and it's difficult. The economy is a really complex system, and it's really hard to feed these incentives in to the place where they will make the most effect. Then there's institutional inertia, and I think this applies particularly to public procurement offices, which have a very, very strong culture of going for least cost solutions. Some of them will be going for lifetime least cost solutions, but I think that's still very much the exception rather than the rule. And they're proving extremely difficult to change. And I think many of the people who are on this call will be public servants, and I'm sure you have lots of examples yourselves of the institutional inertia of actually getting things done. Then there's information, lack of information, what is more circular and what isn't. There's huge debates and discussions about circularity indicators, etc. And again, efforts to resolve these problems through mandatory disclosure, through information technology, through blockchain, indeed. I was fascinated this year to have a dissertation from one of my MSc students who was looking at the application of blockchain in the fashion industry, and of course, labeling, consumer labeling. Then there's the issue of fairness and justice, and very often those words are used as if they're somehow unproblematic, but actually, pretty well everyone has their own idea of what fairness and justice amount to across these issues. And in the CO2 field, of course, we've seen the German discussion about phasing out coal and the perception that this has to be a just transition. And the result is that the richest country in Europe, or one of them, is going to take until 2038 before it takes coal out of its electricity mix. Obviously,
2 minutes
that's a
left.
really difficult issue, with public deliberation as one way of getting around that. And it's interesting that sort of the climate assembly process in the UK, and I know there's been one in France too, has sought to bottom out some of these issues, but they're really difficult. Then there's lobbying by incumbents. The fossil fuel industries were the richest industries in the world, and they've spent very large sums of money obfuscating and seeking to reduce moves towards a low carbon economy, particularly. But we are seeing countervailing interest groups growing. And that's been a long process over the last 20 years. But the renewable energy industry is now pretty strong. And so that's a potential solution to that. In Europe, at least, I don't see that so strongly in the United States. There are different national contexts, obviously, most obviously in the US with their states, but also in Europe, and all countries like to do things differently. And it's very hard to see how we're going to get a common approach to economic incentives or taxation across the EU, given the unanimity principle that currently applies. International trade rules, you're not supposed to discriminate on the basis of process and production methods, according to the WTO, even where these relate to global externalities. That's never really been tested in the WTO court, but the WTO at the moment is a shadow of its former self, and it's not at all clear that it's in any position to rule about anything. But obviously, that's an issue. And then there's this really difficult issue, and I, as an environmental economist, know this more strongly than others. The evaluation of external costs is really difficult. The literature on the social cost of carbon is huge, and it's completely unresolved. The solution to that is through approximation, that a low cost is better than none, where you are clear that there's a negative externality, but clearly there's room for challenge if you arrive at any kind of price that is really going to bite and is going to change behavior.
Paul, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, because your time is really up actually, but I know that you have two more slides. Can you round off your presentation, please?
I will round off my presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. And all I really want to say is that, having thought about this issue for rather a long time, one potential solution is to extend the extended producer responsibility idea such that those people who bring materials and put them onto the market retain the ownership of the materials throughout their lives, and that they're therefore responsible for looking after them throughout their lives, and they have legal responsibility to do that. And I think that that would lead, as I've shown in this little Venn diagram, to new business models, to more high quality materials in the value chain, to better products and lower waste fees for consumers, and resource and impact decoupling for society as a whole. And you will have seen on the previous slide, there was a link to a paper if you want to explore those ideas in more detail. Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing now. And in fact, my clock says it's exactly 11 o'clock, Arthur. So I don't consider that I was over time. You're muted.
No, you're never over time. But still, we have to go on. So thank you for this. And to all the participants, and we're now with 79, thank you for that, for joining. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat so that you can, as a group, you can discuss them further in the breakout sessions, which will start shortly. But first of all, let me give the floor to Astrid Ladefoged from the European Commission to tell us what is going on at the moment. And for that, I would like to share my screen to show her presentation. Just a moment.
Thank you very much, Arthur. And hello, everybody. Nice to see so much interest for this topic. I wanted my slides to be a bit opening up the debate, let's say, and be a bit provocative, maybe in relation to some of what Paul so rightly set out in terms of this topic has been around for a long time, and there's many reasons, as he explained, that it's complicated, difficult, complex, and so I call my presentation 100 years because this year we celebrate it's 100 years ago that Arthur Pigou wrote his famous article about the externalities. So let's look a bit where we are today. Next slide, please. So in a way, one can come up with all kinds of things of how it's complex and difficult about putting these incentives to do what we want, to ensure what we want happens, and to put incentives to ensure what we don't want to happen happens. So now here, this looks just at the economic explanation for that, but in principle, what was really lovely in this article written 100 years ago was that it was very simple. It was very, very simple. It was just saying if what you are doing actually has an external cost you put on your neighbor, on whatever, then maybe the government could put a tax on you that could either be redistributed to your neighbor or could at least prevent you maybe from doing as much pollution, for example, as you want. Next slide, please. But then this tax shift, as we have been talking about also for a very long time, somehow it's just not happening. So I look here, the graph shows you the evolution in the EU, which has basically been stable over the last decade. The graph shows you the part of the overall taxation that government put in their coffers, and which part of that comes from environmental externalities being taxed. If you look at the OECD, you will find quite similar trends. However, I wanted to note a positive development I've noted looking at what is happening in Africa is that there you see resource taxation starting to have more traction and being on an upward trend. Next slide, please. So I think we will use the breakout session to discuss more in detail some of what Paul also mentioned as why are things not happening maybe fast enough, what are the obstacles, the global dimension and so on. But from the Commission side, I wanted to put a bit of emphasis on how we look at this. So you're all well aware of the European Green Deal. And I put on the slide a couple of quotes from our President Ursula von der Leyen's State of the Union speech, where she also put a specific notion about the limits of this model, the economic model that values wealth above well-being. And she also mentions carbon must have its price because nature cannot pay this price anymore. So from the Commission side, we see this is very important, specifically on the circular economy. As you all know, we put a lot of emphasis on getting the incentives right in the action plan. So we will discuss some of that in more detail in the breakout. And also in the Green Deal itself, we call for the taxation shift. Next slide, please. So I want to also end on a positive note, in the sense of, if you took a step back and imagine, well, this is not about stopping one little problem here and one little problem there, but if you look at this in a broader societal context, you will have employment is dropping, so taxing employment is maybe not so sustainable in the longer run. You have robotization, you have demography changes. All of these are good arguments for why the taxation may need to shift towards environmental taxation. If you look at the last slide, then I just put a couple of links about how we've been looking at this recently from the Commission side. So, as I mentioned, the Green Deal calls for this taxation shift. Then very specifically on some of the topics also mentioned by Paul, there is work ongoing on revising the Energy Taxation Directive. We are working on a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And you will see this year we released the latest tax action plan, also putting some emphasis on green taxation, and also on the global topic. I think that's very important. If we want to move forward on this, as Paul said, for competitiveness reasons, we need the developing countries and our partner countries to move as well. So we put quite some emphasis on that. And finally, I've shared with you here the link to the guidance we've given to member states, because as also already mentioned by Paul, taxation is a member state competence. So this is where we need to see things happen. Thank you, Arthur.
Okay, well, thank you, Astrid, and that was exactly within 5 minutes. So thank you for that. So that is both now told by Paul Ekins what is difficult, but how important it is, and this is repeated by Astrid and also shown what is already happening. So now, before we join the breakout groups, we would like to do a short poll. I will stop sharing my screen now again, just a moment. How do I do that again? That should work like this. And Bas, will you now launch the poll, or should I do it?
I will. Okay. So the poll is launched now.
So the question is, which of the following economic incentives, which are the ones we will be discussing, has the largest change potential to foster a low carbon circular economy? And it is already working. Great. And this is also going very fast. With already 50% voted. This is wonderful. So for those of you who are still looking, there should be somewhere on your screen a poll window and a possibility to bring out your vote, which is actually a nice day to do that in view of the US elections. Okay, well, it's more or less stabilizing now. No, there's still a few more coming in.
So we still need 20-something votes. If you can please vote, then we will close the poll. A few more seconds. Still 20 people need to vote. But they are having a coffee, Arthur. So
okay, I guess so. Or maybe they cannot find the button. Anyway, it's all new. So let's just see what this brings us. Just briefly reflecting on this. What we see is that the winner is the tax shift from labor to resources, which I find very recognizable actually, because also within my own organization, Ecopreneur, this is the one that we would like to have in the end the most of all. And it's also a bit encompassing some of the others. But then if you look to the tax shift, from the tax shift down, then the second one is CO2 pricing. And that I recognize as well, very hot topic at the moment, of course. Then the next one on the list is the taxation of virgin resources use. And that is very interesting. This topic was actually brought in at the last moment by the French Institute for Circular Economy. So this is nice that you will be discussing that too. And the others have votes as well, like the VAT reduction, circular procurement, and EPR. Okay, So this gives us an impression, and also everyone has given votes to any one of these. And now we'll go into the breakout room. So we will now put in an invitation. So if you see it now in your screen, you can join a breakout room, and we will see you back in 20 minutes. Okay, have a good conversation.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had interesting discussions.
We did.
Good. Waiting for Arthur to enter the room, and then he can take over again. Arthur, are you there? Ah, there you are. Welcome back, Arthur. Please unmute your mic. Yep.
Somehow
you can
thrown out.
Okay.
All right. Okay, is everybody back?
Yes,
great.
Everybody's back.
Okay, thank you, everybody. At least I learned a lot in my breakout session on the VAT. So now we could turn to the final part. We have 40 minutes left before the end of this session, and then we move back to the plenary session and on the WebEx. So now we will have a discussion with our panel. First of all, I would like to ask our keynote speakers to briefly, like in 1 minute, reflect on the session that they were in. Can you maybe, Paul, can you maybe say something?
Yes, of course, I can say something. I think we discussed two things, which was the vexed issue of unanimity in on taxation matters in the EU, and whether this might be improved by the awkward customer of the UK now being outside the EU. And I think people generally felt that that was something that did need to be addressed. And then the second issue, we spent a bit of time talking about carbon border adjustments, border carbon adjustments, however you announce them, and the relevance of that to the tax shift. And I think Stephane can probably summarize that as well as I can if he wants to, but those were the two main issues that came up in the rather short time that we had available. And clearly they're pretty complex issues.
Joanna, can you maybe...
Yes, I can.
Stop your...
It's not me.
Okay, I don't know. Okay, no, I was actually trying to find out if Astrid Ladefoged would like to also say something about their discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Arthur. I was in the discussions on taxation of virgin resources, and I think our discussions were circling a bit much around, it sounds like the previous session, about what are the barriers. I mean, because as many noted, it's not easy to move forward on this at EU level, because taxation is a member state competence. So we had some discussions about competitiveness issues related to this, and also several people asked questions about what are the social implications, and how much are any taxation going to just be passed on to consumers and not necessarily making the polluters pay. So we had some discussions around the social aspects, which I think is important.
Okay, thank you. And then I would like to give the floor to, because we're walking here through the panels, to the members also of this leadership group. First, Valerie Plainemaison, who led the Circular Procurement group. Are you still with us?
Yes, I'm still with you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. My camera was unmuted. I don't need it now particularly, but for the exchange, it would have been a bit better. So the members of the group mentioned as a kind of first obstacle the lack of a definition of circular product, which means in practice that public buyers would need to buy on the basis of existing standards, and standards exist for many products. But the fact that this question was asked means that for some non-specialists or even for specialists, there is a need for having a clearer and simple concept for a public purchaser. Otherwise, there is a risk of litigation, which was not really addressed, but we know that the risk of the fear of litigation is one of the obstacles to circular procurement. So we also were thinking about pilot product or product categories of product to be immediately brought as mandatorily bought in a circular way. I mean, stop talking about that and do something. So do have mandatory rules at EU level on a series of products that are not too complicated. Okay. Because if we try and tackle all the public procurements, it's huge. It seems that in some member states there are already good experience and good rules, and some of them being well implemented. So another important thing is to have tools for monitoring the situation, which is the variable. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. We only have like 9 minutes left, so I would like to ask Romina Giovanetti to tell us something about the extended producer responsibility, and maybe in 1 minute so that we have enough room for everybody.
Thank you, Arthur. Yes, so we talked about EPR and we talked about effectiveness of the new waste legislation in terms of EPR, and also the demand side of EPR, which is not so clear. You know, there's a missing link apparently in relation to how we communicate with consumers, and not necessarily in terms of, you know, collection, because consumers are maybe more aware of collection because they need to contribute to separate collection, but with regards to what happens after, sorting, recycling, and this is also linked to local infrastructure. So this was one of the issues. But clearly this information to consumers is an area where we have potential, you know, especially when we talk about market creation, because this is participation of consumers is key. Some instruments were discussed, like labeling, for instance, but also EPR governance, you know, so involving citizens in the decisions that EPR schemes take, and including social and environmental criteria in the recovery options that are discussed and decided upon producers, you know, when it comes to recycling or recovering the products and packaging that are put on the market.
Okay, thank you. Then I move to Amelie Vaz about taxation of virgin resources.
So Astrid talked about a little, but the main issues about taxation of virgin resources is the limitation. We will need agreements between states to make this work. We also need a strong, clear, effective regulation, implementation, and enforcement, and control made by European or member state institutions. And the main issue is the compensation of this tax. How to spend the taxation? We talk about some mechanisms, compensation for producers on other taxes, for example, tax credits also. So I think this subject will need more reflections.
Okay, thank you. Then next on the list, that's myself, just very briefly. So about the VAT, we had a very interesting discussion about what is possible with VAT. The main things were that currently VAT, lowering the VAT is forbidden for most economic activities by the EU VAT directive. And this directive is also very important because it creates an internal market. And many stakeholders are against breaking this up, because then you will get different VAT levels in all member states. At the same time, if you ask entrepreneurs in the green sector about what would help you most, many of them say the VAT, lowering the VAT for my product group if it is really a circular or a green one. Yeah, that is more or less the dilemma that is for VAT. We also discussed that if you don't lower the VAT, the only other instruments that can give disadvantage to the green frontrunners is EPR. So then all the things should go into the EPR, or you should maybe make this a European thing, that you go to a low VAT for some really green products and services for all Europe. But then this is a member state mandate. Okay, so that was about the political part for the VAT. And then about the CO2 pricing, very important. We're moving now to the most important ones. Joanna Kulczycka from Poland.
Thank you, Arthur, very much. We have really a long discussion, intensive discussion. So a few things. First of all, we would like to have not talking only about CO2, but CO2 equivalent, so all greenhouse gases. That's important, including methanes and other greenhouse gases for counting. The second, we should talk not only about CO2, new CO2 greenhouse gases, but also the greenhouse gases, how we can improve from already existing installation like methanes and the others. So taking into account the positive carbon when we reduce from already existing, let's say, landfilling and the other things. The other, everybody agree that carbon border tax is very important, and we really need it stronger implemented. And the last point is that the money which we received from the carbon taxation shouldn't go to the general budget. So it's not to the budget of the country. It should go to the special budget, which can be really then applied to the environmental and other investment solution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. And then last but not least, because it was the most important one, this is about the tax shift, and this is led by Stephane Arditi from the EEB. Stephane.
Well, thank you, Arthur. I think Paul really summarized the two issues we discussed in this group. I must say that I was, and sorry if I said that, a bit disappointed by the participation of the people. I had a lot of Zoom zombies, and I know we are all with a lot of remote call, but I mean, I think it was a bit of a missed opportunity. I think there was an interesting consideration between UK and EU raised by Paul. Can I mean UK act on, for example, on a carbon border mechanism if EU does not do it, or reversely, can you be a kind put under pressure if UK is really willing to do it? But the link between the carbon border adjustment and the tax shift was also raised by Paul in terms of could this lead to an adjustment in terms of labor cost all along the supply chain, and we could not really sort out this discussion, but could that be that because we've got a kind of carbon adjustment that may raise price, this will result in adjustment on labor and then the need to reduce the labor tax. And finally, we also discuss specifically for this kind of international trade-oriented instrument, if the main goal is to protect, I would say, EU industry, or if the main goal is to incentivize other countries outside EU to also adopt a form of carbon border adjustment and carbon pricing mechanism. And we think that the main beauty of such an instrument would be that many more countries replicate a possible carbon border adjustment, because that would then kind of globalize this kind of CO2 pricing.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Stephane, and thank you, everybody. We only have 1 minute left, and we said that there was room for one closing question. Is there, I see just one thing, something's coming in the chat. Anybody wants to pose a final question?
No, maybe Arthur, I just take that as an opportunity to say what member of our group said that they are now working on a commission report on the tax shift from labor to environmental, and that would be made available in a few months, I mean, when the study is finished.
Okay, that's very interesting. We're now at the end, and the thing that was not mentioned by me, and this may be true for all, I don't know, is that there is a lot that is still not known about these incentives. So closing off, I thank everybody for participating in this interactive meeting. There will be a report from this, and will be made by the ECESP Secretariat. And now please, I ask everybody to go back to the plenary meeting on the WebEx interface, and I hope to see you there in a minute. Thank you. Thank you very much, all the speakers. Thank you very much, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.